So the Russia stuff, let's get into that. So I
Hmm.
don't know if you remember back in the day, that was one point we probably agreed on most things back then in 2017, 2018. But the Russia thing, I was one of the few people that was pushing back on this and critiquing this Russophilia that was permeating. The Dugan stuff was definitely seeping into the alt right at the beginning there. Heinbach was pushing it. TRS still
Oh yeah.
pushes it. Uh, a lot of these outlets were writing that, or they're attempting, in my view, to kind of get some shekels from the Kremlin. That's what it looked like. They're pandering in order to get something back for it. What was the thinking there at the beginning when you were into that?
Well, I think you could say that they were pandering for rubles. I
Hmm.
do think that there is there was a lot of sincerity actually, and I think that in a way makes it worse, if you understand my meaning. But I I when I look back at my own personal history and intellectual history, I was never a Russophile in any way. I was when I was in college and graduate school. I was interested in the Cold War and strategy. I remain critical of America and Americanism, but I certainly would never take the side of the Soviets in a conflict like that. And I sort of I unquestionably understood what was going on. It was actually when I was at Duke graduate school, I was interested in Kojev and the European concept, and even the Coudenhove-Kalergi and Adenauer as these people sort of reaching for a European concept. So that was my background. Now, um, a but I do understand the idea of America is so fake and gay that Russia must be better, and Putin's a dictator. Putin threw Pussy Riot in jail. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, that's the logic.
America invaded. Yeah, America invaded Iraq on false premises, and et cetera, et cetera. I get it. And I was a part of it. I mean, I was on RT a number of times from about 2011 to 2016. And I don't know, I was a sort of foreign policy analyst, I guess, if you would call me that. And I would say a lot of these things. Now, there's a situation with my now ex-wife that certainly inflected matters, and I can talk about that. Talk about it seriously. Don't want to get into any
Yeah. How much influence
personal
did she
battles.
have? How much influence did she have on pushing you in that direction? Because she was obviously part of the translation of Dugan's book. She was definitely hugely into that stuff and was a Russian chauvinist.
Yes,
Um, so did she
correct.
suck you into that framing, that mind framing?
Yes, I think that's a fair thing to say. And I mean, look, to be fair to Dugan, I do think that he it can be a very interesting guy. I don't regret, in the sense of working on and publishing the his book on Heidegger that was published into English. At one point, it was actually banned on Amazon due to sanctions. Not that it was bringing in any sort of money that could be taxed. I mean, it would sell, I don't know, a dozen copies a year or something. But um, uh, it is what it is. I mean, he can. There's aspects of Duganism that are interesting. As a phenomenon, he's interesting because whether Dugan is directly influencing the Kremlin or the Kremlin is directly influencing Dugan, I think is something that's a debate that can be had. But regardless, as a phenomenon, I think Dugan is interesting and worthy of analysis and criticism, obviously. in that regard. Now, there's some other sinister aspects of Dugan that I could get into, but I guess I will now. I have been shown by someone who's researched this a memo that was written in English by Dugan on basically laying out the land of the far right. And it went something like this, oh, there's some libertarians out there and they love guns and gold and they like Ron Paul and they hate NATO and American foreign policy. There are some traditionalist Catholics out there, and they don't have strong opinions on foreign policy, but they're starting to hate the government over abortion or religious freedom, et cetera, et cetera. There are some neo pagans out there. This is probably the group that I would be associated with. They've read Fay and Nietzsche, et cetera, and they have a different worldview that is antipodal to America, so they can be anti-NATO as well. There are some, well, and it just, the list went on. There's probably 12 of them. And I think his assessment was accurate. It was the assessment of someone in some ways engaged in an influence operation, or you could say engaged in espionage. It was, how can we use the far right to promote our agenda? The agenda is simply the demoralization of the West, by which they mean the military alliance that is NATO, that is directly facing them. The Kremlin and the Russia will accept all sorts of comers. You can be a black nationalist. You can be a neo-pagan. You can be a Catholic. You can be a libertarian. So long as you end up at the point that NATO is evil, you're good. They want you. So RT, to its credit, RT, and using this as an example of the Russian propaganda method, RT isn't just propaganda in the pejorative sense that we usually use that term of, Russia wonderful, come live in Russia, Putin's so smart. It wasn't that, actually. They would have Abby Martin on, who's a sincere leftist, probably Marxist inflected at least. And she would talk. She would even criticize Russia. They would have Alex Jones on. They would have Richard Spencer on a few, dozen times over the course of a few years. They would have Martin Zellner on to talk about identity in Europe or whatever. They're willing to tolerate pretty much anything so long as they are deconstructing any sort of positive, moralizing master narrative about the West and NATO having a purpose. And so they were highly ecumenical or tolerant, I guess you could say. You could be a total libtard and they would accept you, so long as you were good on that one issue and so long as you could be viewed as engaging in a general demoralization. I think Dugan was very interested in the far right because, in a way, we were the only ones who would have him. If you're going to get a hearing anywhere, it would be, with Arctos or with, myself publishing the Heidegger book or in, some of these nationalist groups. Now, I think Duganism and the Kremlin have moved on since then, and they moved on to greener pastures. I don't think Dugan cares that much about, say, me or the alt-right or anything like that. Arctos could publish his books, whatever. I don't know how many of those are being read. They have moved on in a way to MAGA and the mainstream right. And I noticed this in 2022, and it really stuck with me. It was an episode of a program called Candace, done by the Daily Wire. So it was Candace Owens, and she was in an Oprah-like setting. I guess they were trying this out. It didn't work. They had Jack Posobiec, who is a highly suspicious person. I don't think he is a U.S. federal agent, by the way. I am of the opinion that he's working for another government. He's married to a Belarusian wife, by the way, who ran a yogurt stand. before getting into politics. I mean, a remarkable rise. Um, so she had Jack Posobiec on, and they were talking about the recent invasion of Ukraine. And Jack
Mhm.
Posobiec said, "Oh, you have to understand. See, Ukraine's not a real country. It was a mistake that they have sovereignty at all. Referendum in 1991. I mean, did they mean it? Of course they didn't. And the languages are the same. It's like a dialect. It's like you're speaking Southern slang as opposed to a Boston
Yeah,
accent or something. It's
Daily
the same
Daily
language.
Stormer Daily Stormer was pushing that nonsense too. I mean, these people have no clue what they're talking about.
Yes,
They were just saying whatever they
I
thought they
was
could to
pushing the
deconstruct.
nonsense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was pushing the nonsense. And keep in mind, they started even in Russian official documents. They would put out statements starting to use like on the Ukraine and a preposition. I don't speak Russian, but as opposed to in the Ukraine as a sort of rough English translation. So they were already depicting it as a territory as opposed to a state and a
Yeah.
nation. And what I heard from Jack Posobiec, and of course, dumb Candace Owens, who's, you know,
Yeah, the
clearly
dumbest of the dumb, yeah.
retarded. Yeah. She's just nodding along. Oh, yeah. And he's saying the exact same things that I said in 2014 and that were, to be honest, I would associate with my then ex-wife as well. There is a list of these talking points. They don't need me to do it anymore because they now have Candace Owens, who has millions of views on YouTube and is reaching a conservative audience that I simply don't reach. And so
But
I think the problem of Russian influence is very deep. It's much worse now than it was in 2014.